Hey everyone, Chris here from Varsity Gaming, and today I'm going to be doing a rant slash opinion video, probably more rant than anything. Today's topic is about reusing weapons in Rainbow Six Siege. And if you haven't been keeping up, basically what happened was the new operators were announced for Operation Phantom Sight. We got Nook and Warden, and they don't have any new weapons. Every single weapon that each of the operators has comes from other CTUs and other operators. Next two primary weapons are the FMG-9, which is Smoke's primary, and then the 612 Silent Shotgun, which is Legion's primary. And for secondary, she has the Deagle, which comes from the Navy SEALs, and then she has the 5.7 USG or whatever pistol from FBI. Warden's primaries are the MPX, which he gets from Valkyrie, and the whatever shotgun from the SAS. And then for secondaries, he gets the SMG-12 from Vigil and Dokkaebi, and the P10C, I think it's called, pistol from Clash. So as you can see, a big mishmash of operators' weapons. And since this has been announced, people have been complaining endlessly, whether it be on Reddit, Twitch, YouTube, anywhere. Everyone's biggest complaint about the new season is that there's no new weapons. Everyone's excited for the operators, for the cafe rework, for all the new quality of life changes, but everyone keeps mentioning how no new weapons means that the season is unexciting. And today I'm going to rant about why this is not that big of a deal and why people are making it out to be a much bigger deal than it actually is. Now, I'll warn you before I get into the actual rant, this might get a bit messy. I wrote out a huge script with all these points and all these different things I want to talk about, but then the more I wrote, the less I agreed with myself, so I just decided to wing it, and I'm just going to talk over some huge key points that I want to mention, and then just freestyle the rest of it. So before we get into my points, let's talk about why people are so upset about this. Every single operation up until this season coming up has introduced new weapons. Even Operation Chimera, which introduced Line and Finka, who both had one weapon from previous CTUs, still had new weapons. Line is from the Gigan CTU, so he had both the 417 and the shotgun, but he still had the new Vector V308. Meanwhile, Finka was from the Spetsnaz, and she has the Sausage and the 643PO whatever LMG, but at least she got a new weapon with the spear. So Ubisoft has conditioned us to expect new weapons every single season. And I'm sure people wouldn't have minded if they reused some weapons but still introduced one or two new ones, but they didn't. And many people think that this is kind of like the demise of Siege, that because we're not getting new weapons, it means that Ubisoft is just not putting in any effort anymore, and that the game's gonna die soon. And while I have been fairly vocal, whenever people ask me how long do you think Siege has left, I give an honest answer of 2 to 3 years. And while I still do believe in that, I don't think this is the cause of that. I don't think that reusing weapons is really going to kill Siege. I just think that eventually it's going to run its course. But hopefully I'm wrong. Anyways, let's get into the actual rant and points that I want to make about why reusing weapons is not that big of a deal. First up, we're going to talk about probably the most iconic example of new weapons being overpowered. There have been many, but there's one that stands out in everyone's mind if you've been playing this game for the last 2 years, and that is Ella's Scorpion. Ella came out in Year 2, Season 3 with Operation Blood Orchid, and at launch she was just completely broken. She had by far the absolute best gun in the game, better than majority of the attackers' guns, which is crazy to even try to think about. At launch, it had a 50-round magazine, literally 0 recoil, and 28 damage per shot. You were a fucking idiot if you didn't have an Ella on your team with the Scorpion. You could run around, ace everybody, and still have bullets left over. And this caused a huge uproar in the community. The only people who weren't upset about this were people who decided to now main Ella, basically Ash Jaeger mains. So there was uproar in the community, and what happened? Well, it took quite a while for anything to really come of it. Ubisoft knew about these issues, but they weren't really addressing it. It took nearly 2 months for Ubisoft to finally issue a nerf for Ella. And what did they do? They nerfed her recoil, which for those of you who did basic math will know that 0 times anything is still 0. She had 0 recoil before, she had 0 recoil after. 2 months roll by, and then another patch notes comes out with another Ella nerf. They reduced her magazine size from 50 to 40. They keep her damage, they keep her recoil, they keep her fire rate, everything. But her ammo capacity is cut by 10. People were upset. This was not a nerf that we were hoping for 4 months after Ella came out. And then not to mention, this patch notes has one of the most iconic lines in Siege history and goes down as one of my favorite things that Ubisoft has ever released about any operator. This is around the time when they first started adding the designer notes, so it was a big deal. And a designer commented on why they only applied one nerf to Ela, reducing her ammo count. And to put it into my own words, basically the designer was saying that they were looking at different ways of nerfing Ela because they didn't want to ruin her ability to kill multiple people and stay alive. And then the line that sticks with everyone is that they wanted to keep her unique. And that meant that they wanted her to have the ability to kill multiple people because that made her unique. This quickly became a meme in the community, and everyone was talking about how operators won't get nerfed because they're too unique. And Ubisoft eventually publicly noted that they should not have used that language, and it's not what they meant, but the damage was done. 2 more months passed by. This is now 6 months after Ela being released. Finally, the nerf that she deserved was being employed. Damage reduced from 28 to 23. Recoil made almost impossible to control on full auto fire. And Ela's reign was finally over. And this whole ordeal taught Ubisoft a good lesson, to not wait 6 fucking months after release to nerf an operator. And now I should also mention, this video is specifically talking about weapons, so I'd left out the fact that they did reduce Ela's Grismots from 4 to 3 pretty early on. And that's also another reason why the designers said that they were trying to limit what they were going to change on her because they wanted her to stay unique. So it's not like they did absolutely nothing. They did do some changes, but in terms of weapon play, it was fucking atrocious. But this also taught Ubisoft another lesson, which was that weapons don't need to be incredibly unique. They just need to work. And this brings me into my next point, is that most of the weapons that have been in the game now for some time are basically just rehashes of old weapons with very slight modifications. People have been complaining saying they want new weapons in the game because they're different. They feel different than other weapons. But really that's not the case. Let's take Jackal, for example. He has the C7E. The C7E is incredibly similar to the AK-12. C7E has 2 more damage than the AK-12, but it has 50 less rounds per minute in terms of fire rate, which might seem like a decent amount, but it really isn't. If we look at this in terms of damage per second, the C7E has a damage per second of 613, while the AK-12 has one of 638. That's a difference of 25 damage per second. That's almost negligible. And then this is the case for the majority of the weapons. You basically take an old gun, give or take 1 to 2 damage, and then change the fire rate by about 50. And then this has been done so many times that we basically now have guns that cover all sorts of damage. If we just look at attacking weapons, the damage per second ranges anywhere between 467 to 638, with most of the differences between the guns being around 5 to 10 difference in damage. So Ubisoft has basically all of its bases covered in terms of damage, which means if we're adding in new guns, they're going to either have repeated stats from other guns, and people are going to complain about that, or they're going to be very, very slightly different than current ones. And honestly, there's not too many different combinations they can come up with without just repeating stats from other guns. Let's take Nomad's AK-74M and Finka's Spear 308, for example. The AK has a damage per second of 477, meanwhile the 308 has a damage per second of 443. So this is about a difference of 33. Now let's say, okay, we want something in the middle. That would be around 459. While we don't have a gun that's at exactly 459, we do have one that's at 466. Ying's T95. So if we're coming out with a new operator and we're like, okay, we don't want them to have as much damage as Nomad's AK, but not as little damage as Finka's Spear. Let's just give them the T95 from Ying then. That's roughly in the middle. So there really is no need to make very slight variations of other weapons. We have most of the bases covered. Now there is one issue that comes with this, and I wanted to make a point to talk about it because I know someone's going to mention it, and someone actually did mention it on stream today, is that when reusing guns, we might run into the issue of balancing operators and it affecting other ones. Let's say 2 months down the line we look at Nook and we say, oh, Nook is really strong. She's actually too strong. We need to nerf her. If you nerf either of her guns, either Legion or Smoke will get hit. Nerf her secondaries, well, either the Navy SEALs operators get hit or the FBI ones do. And most of those operators overall are sitting pretty, so we don't need to change any of the weapons. So this does raise a bit of an issue. How do we treat operators who are reusing weapons when trying to nerf them? Well, for the most part, we can just look at their gadget. A lot of the times, the gadget can be a reason for overperformance. So by nerfing it, you'll then make the operator weaker. Even if they have good guns, they're still going to be weaker overall. Now let's say you change their utility and they're still overperforming. Well, then it's simple. You just give them a different gun. Using the same example, let's say, Nook doing too well. FMG9, too strong in her hands. It does 400 damage per second. Alright, let's just give her a weaker gun. Valkyrie's MPX, 360 damage per second. Obviously, you'd want to look at the attachments as well. You don't want to give someone an ACOG when they don't need it, because rumor has it that Nook did have an ACOG and an AR originally, and then she was deemed way too strong, so they kept nerfing her until we got the current Nook. So you'd have to be a little careful there and make sure not to give her an attachment she didn't have before. But as you can see, there's options to give her weaker weapons. Operators don't have to keep their loadouts in the future. We can swap weapons around as much as we want, which is ideal for the game. Have a pool of weapons, have a pool of operators, and mix match them according to how well they perform. So I really don't see this as a huge issue. Moving on to a separate point. Originally this was going to take place right after Ella's overpowered weapon, but I'm lazy, I'm just going to add it here. Let's talk about an underpowered weapon, and how hard it is to balance those. Capitão's Para 308. It was released alongside Capitão in Skull Rain. When it was released, it was overpowered. It had 55 damage per shot, the highest of any assault rifle in the game, tied with Blackbeard's MK17 at the time. And then with the release of Operation Red Crow, they nerfed both weapons, dropping it down by 10 or 11 damage each. After that, it was considered to be one of the worst assault rifles you could run. And then move forward to January 2018, and Capitão's Para 308 gets a 3 damage buff, which finally makes it somewhat viable again. So keep in mind, this is about a year and a half after launch. He's finally made somewhat viable. Only to have the LMG get buffed 4 months later, giving it the exact same stat line as the Para 308. This means that both of his guns are exactly the same, it's just that the LMG has more ammo but takes longer to reload, and then the Para has less ammo but it's quicker to reload. So it's more of a personal choice. Obviously you can factor in recoil, but for most people that doesn't really matter. So Capitão came out in August of 2016. The last patch that bounced the M249 to its current state came out in May 2018. This means it took almost 2 years to finally balance Capitão's guns. Compare this to the majority of the original operators. Most of them have had 1, maybe 2 small changes to their guns. Most of them have just been losing ACOGs, and that's it. But in terms of losing damage, there's only been a few cases of that. The MP5 got nerfed by I think 2 damage. The R4C got nerfed by 1 damage. They just don't happen that much. Most of the original guns are fairly well balanced. So why would we bother introducing a bunch of new guns that are going to take forever to make them properly balanced when we can just give new operators old guns that are balanced? And like I just mentioned in the previous section, if it turns out whatever gun you gave the operator is too strong on them, just swap it out with another one. There are options. It doesn't necessarily have to be new content, and this will also make it easier on Ubisoft as a whole. Now they don't have to worry so much about balancing weapons, they can focus on the actual operators themselves, and maybe this will introduce some better operators in the future, ones that are more redefining of the meta. We can hope. And it's not like new operators are going to get boring because they have the same guns as other ones. There's so many weapons to choose from, it's still going to be at least somewhat interesting. Compared to other FPSs, Siege has a crazy amount of weapons. Including pistols, Siege has a total of 82 guns. Looking at other popular FPSs like Black Ops 4 or Apex, Black Ops 4 has 26 guns total, Apex has 19. The only game that I've found that really compares to it, at least from big studios, is Battlefield 1, which has 81 weapons, so it's just one off Siege. So 82 total guns is more than enough for future operators. They have a whole armory to choose from, it's not going to get stale. Think about it, does an operator need some destruction? Give them one of the pocket shotguns. We have 2 of them now, with slight variations between them. We have so many options for operators, it's not even funny. And the last point I want to end the video off on is something that I talked about previously in the last rant video, which was power creep. As the seasons have gone on, new operators keep coming out with more and more powerful weapons. Because if they put out a new weapon that had the exact same stat line as the previous one, people would be upset, so they have to slightly tweak it. And for the most part, they've been getting stronger and stronger. So that just makes new operators better by default, and then they get nerfed, and then it takes a whole year cycle for them to finally balance out the weapon. So instead of introducing so much power creep, we can easily eliminate this by reusing weapons. And that overall is why I think the reuse of weapons is not that big of a deal. To reiterate, in case if some of you want to debate with me in the comments, point 1, guns come out overpowered all the fucking time. Point 2, we have almost every possible damage combination covered. If you want a new operator to have a certain amount of damage, give them one of the already existing weapons. They cover almost every possible range. 3, we have weapons that get stuck in balancing limbo for years, making the operator less viable the entire time until they finally get buffed. Avoid this by swapping out weapons, reusing them, whatever. And then 4, kind of touching on 1, we can avoid the issue of power creep, which has been fairly prevalent in this game, by not introducing new weapons, which is generally one of the biggest issues with power creep. But that'll be it for this rant video. I know this wasn't as aggressive or lively as I normally am. Usually I'm yelling at people, but this one I just want to make as a talking video because I feel like there's a lot of emotions arising from this. People aren't really thinking and looking at all the stats. They're just going with their gut instinct, which is new is always better, which isn't always the case. Now, if you do want to debate about this, like I said, you can comment down below. I try to look at most of the comments, but there's usually a bunch of them, so I don't get to all of them. Or if you want to chat with me directly, you can go watch me live on Twitch right now. Just follow the link down below or copy it on the screen. I try to talk a lot with my chat, so you'll probably have a better chance discussing with me on Twitch. I'm live 12 to 4 every single day, Eastern Standard Time. And that's about it. Hopefully I helped calm some people's nerves and made them not react too strongly to the new operators having reused guns. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.